today we're going to be talking about Amendment 3. And first, I'd like to introduce our guest with us today. So we have Jake Hoffman. He's the executive director of the Tampa Bay Young Republicans and the policy director for Smart and Safe Florida, which is the committee that's behind Amendment 3. So, Jake, I just want to welcome you to the show today.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to talk about this issue. I know it's a hot topic right now in Florida.
A lot of Floridians have a lot of questions. So, and I just appreciate you, joining this and having a healthy conversation about this, because I think it's important for voters to have that. And so I just want to kind of frame up our conversation today. So, leading up to this vote, I've seen several debates about Amendment 3. And here's what happens. All too often, these debates are these, pro-cannabis advocates and then anti-cannabis advocates, and then they just end up going at each other's throats. And I think people end up leaving some of these debates a little more confused than not, because it gets a little messy. So, and as you and I spoke about yesterday, right? Like, our country really is struggling to have a healthy civil discourse, things that we just kind of disagree on. And I think it's important to show, especially when we're passionate about it. And I can understand that. But I think it's important to show that there can be a different side to this. And that's what we're going to do today. So really, the goal here is just to have a healthy, respectful conversation and really let the voters decide. That sound good to you?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, cool. So let's talk Amendment 3. So, this is a constitutional amendment that adds adult use 21 and over to the existing medical marijuana amendment. Now, one thing that we do have in common, Jake, is that, I'm not against recreational. I'm not against recreational. I think the plant should have never been made illegal, to be honest with you. But, I'm against Amendment 3, and there's a lot of reasons for that. And that's what we're going to dive in about. So, with that being said, let's talk a little bit about our format. So I've got some questions that have been on the minds of a lot of Floridians throughout the state of Florida that have kind of come into us. And I want us each to be able to just share our perspective on each one of those questions. So what I'm going to do is I'll read off a question, and you can answer it. I'll go ahead and answer it, and we'll just move on to the next question, right? So just give your best answer. I'll give my best answer. Again, we'll let the voters decide. And then at the end of it, then we'll just let participants come in, type in their questions. They can let us know what they have to, and we'll do the same format. I'll let you go first, then I'll go next, and we'll just kind of go from there. Does that sound good?
Yeah, absolutely.
Sounds like a plan. Let's get this party started. All right. So my first question is, in 3 sentences or less, can you tell me why you support Amendment 3?
Yeah. Sentence 1, it should not be illegal. People should not go to jail. So I guess that's 2 sentences, depending on how you look at it. So that's the number one reason, to be honest. The other one more sentence that this is going to be a huge economic boost for the state of Florida. So those are the 2 very easy points that I can make that are under 3 sentences. I know that I expand a little bit, but those are generally the 3 sentences. So it should not be illegal. People should not go to jail. It will help the economy.
Okay, no, very simple. Thank you. So the reason why I do not support Amendment 3, it's 3 things. So Amendment 3, it's a constitutional amendment for the medical program for people with debilitating conditions. And I really feel like recreational should be separated from medical with a whole separate infrastructure. Also, it's also a constitutional amendment. And it's unlike a regular bill, this is going to be permanently a part of our Florida Constitution. And so we really got to think before we just vote yes, even though there's a lot of excitement. And really the third one is, the way it looks is it could really create a legal corporate cartel that really could affect quality, quantity, access to quantity, and really the pricing of products. And not to mention that it eliminates the home grow for personal use, which is another kind of issue that I have with it.
Okay. Do you want to get into some of those issues then?
I just want to kind of just our best answer, and then we'll just kind of move on. Yeah. And then we can kind of go a little bit more as we go. So another question, how will the recreational legalization affect patients who rely on the state's medical program?
So as of now, the medical program does not have any new changes based on this amendment, right? So I don't know, and this is going to be the answer you're going to hear a lot through this conversation, is once this constitutional amendment is passed, because I do think it's going to pass, once it is passed in 10 days or so now, the legislature is going to be able to create a framework. And it's actually in the amendment, right? You have 6 months to create a framework afterwards. And so they're going to go into legislative session in January. And then between January and, April, May of next year, you're going to see a lot of people, maybe your group and many other groups from around the state. They're all going to come up there and they're all going to lobby for different things. You've got the medical side of things, you've got the corporate side of things, you've got the activists, you have other corporations, other small bit. You're going to have everybody come up there advocating for different things in this framework. And so, we can go into the details of how that works, but a lot of people don't realize that that's the process. That is the legislative process. And so, so when you ask, like, how is it going to affect the patients and the medical community that's using it right now, the answer is, as the amendment does not change that. What's going to possibly change that is what the legislature does with this when they go to implement the framework. So, I have no extra knowledge about this, but like if I had to guess, because I've seen it in other states and everything, you might see that medical patients have a different level of THC or a different level of the amount that they can purchase per month versus what the what somebody recreationally can do. That might be something that's a difference. That's kind of very simple to comprehend. But as far as medical patients go, like there's not a massive difference in what's going to be happening to them. Like they're still not going to have like the sales tax and some of those other things that they get the benefits of through the process they have now.
Okay. Well, I think that's kind of where my sticking point is actually, is because nothing does change. And here's what I mean. What I see happening is very likely product shortages, a huge increase in prices because of the higher demand from recreational users. And here's what I mean. What doesn't change, what Amendment 3 doesn't change, is vertical integration. I know that's a big word for a lot of people. A lot of people don't understand what vertical integration is. I just want to do a quick summary. So
Right.
essentially what that means is every dispensary has to operate under a grow license, right? And they also have to own the packaging and processing facility, and then they have to own the dispensaries, right? All having to be vertically integrated, which is, it's about a $50+ million endeavor just to even get started, not to mention all the other costs to get started. So what that does, and currently in the state of Florida right now, we have about something like 22 grow licenses allowed in operation.
25 right
Or
now, I
20,
think
25.
22 in waiting. Yeah.
Yeah, so 25, and there's 22 that's been pending for quite some time now. So the 25 grow licenses, right? And right now, if you look at the medical program, which we're very connected to, there's about 900,000 patients in the program roughly. And that's what these licenses are barely keeping up with. And I say barely because there's a lot of patients who can't get strains and products that they really need for their condition that is really helping their condition, but it's not always there, right? So
Why,
they're
let me
barely,
ask you, I haven't heard that so far. So I'm
yeah.
curious, why do you think that is, that they don't have the ability to get the amount of product that they need?
That's great. I see patients every day, literally every single day. We have over 43,000 on our platform. So let me just kind of finish my point here. So again, like, we have the data set there. We have over 43,000 patients. So, and
And
I
that's what I'm just
constantly
curious
get that.
what your opinion was on why you're
Yeah.
not able to now.
And that's the thing. So as of right now, they're barely keeping up because I know that there's patients, and I'm a patient myself. I'll go to try to get a certain strain, a certain, product that I know really works for me, and it's not always there. So they're barely keeping up with that, right? And that's why there's all those other licenses on the governor's desk right now, but they haven't been released. And that's the concern, because if those licenses are not released, here's what happens. We have a supply chain that's barely kept up with with less than 1 million people. And if you look at the stats, there's about 18 million people over the age of 21 in the state of Florida, not to mention all of our tourism that comes down here. So potentially that supply chain is going to have to keep up with 20+ million people or more, maybe a little less, maybe 10 million people. But going from 1 million, less than 1 million, to over 10+ million people,
So
what it's
what
going
do
to
you think?
create,
What do you think
let,
the
let me
solution?
finish my point. So what it's
Okay.
going to create is a supply chain implosion, right? Because what's going to happen is patients won't be able to get products, which is criminal in my opinion. And recreational users won't be able to get products as frequently. And if you look at other places, right, that have vertical integration, right? So one of them, if you just look to Ohio, they have a limited vertical integration. So their vertical integration is less strict than ours. Okay. And in Ohio, I've been in contact with people in Ohio, and I can tell you they're struggling to get, and they just passed recreational under this
Mhm.
limited vertical integration model. They're struggling to get quality products. Prices have skyrocketed right away. Because
Mhm.
the demand went up so high. And when you have a vertical integration model, that's what happens. And if you look in the past to California, the same thing happened to California in their program. The program's still a mess. So how do we make sure that patients are taken care of in this process?
Well, that was my question to you, because I'm curious, as somebody who sees patients all the time, and you're saying that you have shortages now. My question is, what do you think should happen in to create it so that there's actually enough supply in the state of Florida? What would the solution be in your mind?
Fantastic. That's a great question. One, we all need to vote this amendment down, and we need to create a separate bill that separates recreational from medical, and create a separate infrastructure that would allow for smaller cultivators to enter the market. Because the reality is typically it's the smaller cultivators, the smaller, more boutique cultivators that have better product. So
But that's not something that the amendment has an effect on, to be honest, because that framework that you're talking about, separating both medical and recreational, being able to expand licenses, to be able to give licenses to small growers and things like that, that's not anything that's mentioned in the amendment. So, this is one of my main arguments for the amendment, for people who support legalization in some capacity. And I know that we're going to have a very nuanced conversation for the rest of this time about, like, people who are in the industry and have differing opinions on how it should be done. Um, but but getting this onto the legislature's desk, forcing them to address legalization recreationally, is going to cause this framework to actually happen. The medical program's been around now for what, almost 8 years or so, and you have not seen any bills come anywhere close to passing. Whether it's recreational, expansion of licenses, all these different things, all of these pieces of it are not going to happen. And, like, so that's a lot of, what being our policy director and just somebody being very involved in the political process here in the state of Florida. You are not going to get, like, a homegrown bill next year if this fails. You're not going to get the legislature's not going to come out with a bill that legalizes marijuana in any of the ways that you want it to be, if this amendment does not force it upon their desk, is my main point. So I know that there's reservations about some of the language that's being used, about what's going to happen, how the implementation works, but the reality is it will not get addressed in the state of Florida for many years to come, unless it is done by constitutional amendment.
Well, it hasn't been addressed under the constitutional amendment currently in place for medical patients. So I don't see that ever changing. Here's the thing. Here's the reality: is all those licenses that have been on the governor's desk, they've been in there for quite some time,
I
and
agree.
and that has not been released under the medical program. It
I
certainly is not
agree.
going to be. They're certainly not going, because and DeSantis has not been quiet about this. We know that he's not necessarily a proponent of recreational marijuana. So it's not like he's going to just go and approve those right away. I don't think he's going to
It's
approve them
very,
ever.
it's a very interesting point you make, because one of the main talking points of this entire campaign, and I see it in the comments now, is that this is a monopoly, right? And so if you have all these licenses, you have all these people who want to get in on the game, and they're complaining about it being a monopoly. And, like, people don't know my history, right? Like, I went up there in 2018 and I said, why would you give out 6 licenses, right? That was me to Republican legislators being like, why would you only give out this many licenses? Like, you've totally screwed up the medical program. This was back in 2018, a long time ago, and obviously not a whole lot has changed. And so my point being that, like, if you have, they're saying two things, right? Like, this is a monopoly and we're upset about the monopoly, even though, again, 25 companies is not a monopoly, just by definition. Even if there were three, it's still not by definition. So it's either a monopoly or we need more licenses, but they're holding all the licenses. So, like, you have both of these things going on there. And so I agree with you that this is something that needs to be addressed. And if it were up to me, and it's not up to me, I'm just a guy who advocates for a bunch of stuff in Tallahassee. I'm not in a state house right now. So, look, I would love to see them add additional licenses for medical program, recreational.
And you're right. It's not a monopoly. It's called an oligopoly, actually, is what it actually is. And the thing is, with vertical integration being the way that it's worded in the amendment currently, it's not changing. It does not allow for small cultivators to enter the market, because you can't get a loan to start this, to enter this business. It's federally illegal. And I don't know any small businesses that can come up with just $50 million lickety split.
I
So
agree.
that's just not going to happen. And the thing is this being a permanent change, it's never going to change. That will never go away. So if we vote this in, that will be the problem. And the thing is the reality is we have there's only a handful of really prominent dispensaries. There's like 3 top dispensaries, and the top one literally doubles the amount of dispensaries as the next one in line. That right there should say plenty.
Yeah.
And not to mention,
well, you're dealing with
there. But again, I want to stick to our format. I know we've kind of went back and forth in this one a little bit, but I want to move on to the next one. So we've got a lot of questions here. So the next one, and it's kind of teeters on what we were just talking about. So, will the amendment limit competition by favoring these large vertical integrated companies already in the industry? Like, and I know it's kind of expanding what we just talked about.
Yeah, it's fine. The amendment has nothing to do with favoring anybody. The framework that currently exists for the medical program that you've been discussing, that is what favors large companies. The idea of whatever they're going to do when they get up there in Tallahassee next year, that part of it could, they have every ability to make it better or make it worse, and it's not the amendment that will do that. Again, the amendment forces this on their desk for them to address, okay, and to create a full framework, because if you do not get a full framework done, it's going to be the same problems that you're complaining about, 8 years, not just you, sorry, I don't mean to say you, but I mean, like, I hear it from the medical industry, right? Like, that they are upset about the way that this has been handled over the last 8 years. And you're going to continue to see the same problems unless this amendment is passed and it is forced upon their desk to address. But, favoring competition, all that stuff, like, Tallahassee will set how much it costs for a license, right? Like, they will set the vertical integration rules. They will set, like, how many licenses are giving out. They are the ones that set all of these things. This amendment simply says people who have a license can sell. So who has a license and how they get it is entirely up to Tallahassee afterwards.
Well, and I think because it's a constitutional amendment, this has to be addressed prior. And that's the problem that I'm having with it. And again, like, kind of breaking down vertical integration, because you're talking about, like, the Amendment 3 is not separate from the medical bill. It's the same. It literally adds on to the medical bill. So they're one and the same. Literally, Amendment 3 just literally took the medical bill,
Mhm.
in my opinion, kind of hijacked it and added adult use to it. So, with that being said, the framework is it's vertical integration. So, meaning, like, I just want to go over some of the costs here, right? Because,
Mhm.
that is a big concern for a lot of people
Sure.
here, especially our patients that want to have access to some of the smaller cultivators. So,
Mhm.
a grow license is like $146,000 just to be in the lottery. Okay.
Mhm.
And then we're talking, the vertical integration, you got to own every part of it. Like I said, the grow, I mean, you're talking about land acquisition, the packaging and processing, all of that. That's 50 million plus dollars, right?
Yep.
That has to be separated from medical. There's no other way to make this appropriate to be able to maintain and actually continue to honestly serve, patients in the medical program. And then, let's take a look at what happens to businesses when they have to scale up rapidly, because let's face it, if this passes, there's going to be a lot of people lining up at dispensaries when it gets active to go buy products, right? And what happens to businesses when they have to scale up rapidly? This is what happens. Quality almost always suffers. You scale up rapidly, your supply chain's down here, you got to catch up. And what's going to end up happening over the long term, quality is going to go down. That's just how it happens with every business that scales up rapidly, with most businesses anyway. And, medical patients really deserve diversity, in products, because it's the quality, it's the diversity which drives the quality, and that's the products they need to treat their conditions. And I can tell you, we have a platform that has thousands of extreme of very positive outcomes but it requires some specific attention to really good quality products. That's what this threatens, is quality products, because if this happens in this way, right, and again, it doesn't change the current medical vertical integration. When the supply stays down, demand goes up. There's going to be a lot of dispensaries that can't even keep up, so they're going to end up folding. And what that'll create the groundwork for is other bigger dispensaries that come in and just buy out their licenses. And that and that's a possibility. I'm not saying that's going to happen. It could. And that's why this all has to get figured out long before it goes to a constitutional amendment and becomes permanently a part of our constitution. That's kind of my big one.
Okay.
Just kind of going down the list here. So, another one. In your opinion, why doesn't the amendment allow individuals to grow their own plants for their own personal use?
That's very simple. I mean, are you familiar with the attempt that was made to do both homegrown and recreational that was shot down by the Supreme Court in the state of Florida?
Really? Talk to me about that.
Yeah, so there was an attempt to create a constitutional amendment where it had both homegrown and the recreational sale, similar to what you see now in this Amendment 3. And it was shot down because we have something in Florida called the single subject rule. And, for people who aren't, politically savvy and they don't really know about how this works, like we used to have in Florida, they would combine two different things, right? So take it, for example, partisan school board races and then like medical marijuana. Like they would put both of them in the same amendment and you would vote for both at the same time. And you'd be like, well, I like one of those, but I don't like the other one. Right. Um, and when they do that, like there's problems, obviously. Like people want to vote for one thing, not both things. And so we have something called the single subject rule. It's actually a good rule that we have. And the Supreme Court in the state of Florida here ruled that both homegrown and recreational in the same one was actually two different subjects. Now, I mean, you can agree or disagree with that, but that's what the Supreme Court said. And so they had to do this as a single subject, which is just recreational. Now, as far as homegrown, I don't speak for True Leaf, but I've heard them say many times that like they're for homegrown. They've done all the petitions for homegrown. A lot of the most people in the industry are for homegrown. Your problem is the people up in Tallahassee who don't want to do homegrown, right? Like, and it's been hilarious actually watching a bunch of Republicans say, oh well, why doesn't this have homegrown? We really want. And I'm a Republican, by the way, very Republican. But they're saying like we want, oh, why doesn't this have homegrown? It's like you guys could have passed a homegrown bill for the last 30 years. You said no to a lot of them. Actually, there have been people who've introduced homegrown bills many times and they've always said no. So the idea that like why is it not in the amendment is because it's not allowed by law. And I'm supportive of it. People who are behind this bill are supportive of it. And again, Republicans are apparently supportive of it. So again, in January, if this passes, go up to Tallahassee and advocate and say, hey, we want homegrown alongside of this. You've been saying we need it. We need it now. And it can be done. And this does not prevent a homegrown bill from being introduced in Tallahassee in January.
I appreciate that helping us understand that nuance there, the single subject, because that is important to know. Something that I just is confusing to me, and not necessarily confusing, but it doesn't make sense. If it really is single subject and they're really going to be strict about that, recreational should have never been a part of the medical amendment. So that's one thing. But the other thing though is that should have never happened, right? The other thing too is we've had a medical program for over 8 years. Patients have been, and we've got just under 1 million patients in the program in the state of Florida. They've been screaming for home grow for 8 years and there's been no movement. I just don't see that, a corporation that invested, well over 110 in counting $million to get this amendment on the bill, which is required. I mean, let's face it, to get anything on any kind of amendment passed or any kind of bill passed, it's going to cost money, right? And that was a big corporation that put up $110 million in order to put it on this amendment. Home grow was not included. It's not been a part of the medical program. If this passes, it's never going to happen. I'm sorry, but because here's why. Well, let me finish. And the reason why is that citizens do not have $110 million to just invest, and that's just to invest to get this back on the. And you're saying that it could happen in the next 6 months. If it didn't happen in the last 8 years for patients that are literally suffering from debilitating conditions, there's patients that are literally dying right now and relying on this to stay alive from chemotherapy, Parkinson's, ALS. I can't tell you how many conditions that we see that rely on this that don't even have access to home grow because it's just not going to be allowed. And if that was never allowed under that premise, there is no way that it makes any rational sense that they would ever allow home grow, especially when it specifically says in the amendment it's not allowed.
No, it doesn't say anywhere in there that it's not allowed. It says the people who are allowed to sell are people who have a license, right? That doesn't explicitly say you also can't do homegrown. Again, like single subject, it doesn't address homegrown at all. And the point I've been making a few times now is that like this will not go anywhere as it has not for the last 8-10 years until it is forced upon the legislator's desk. And it's going to if this passes, like again, a lot of people that are in this community, a lot of people want the same thing. They're just kind of arguing over how it needs to get done. But there needs to be a deep understanding of how the politics of Tallahassee, the politics of what it's like to be a state representative or a senator, or and have to listen to the politics, the governor, all of those pieces of it. Like, no, you are not going to get homegrown. If this doesn't pass. But if this passes, now they've been saying for the last 6 months, oh, well, we want homegrown. So is it going to happen? I don't have a crystal ball. I can't tell you. I mean, I would like to see it. And like you said, citizens don't have the ability, the resources, and Republicans, again, I don't disagree with this. They've made it very difficult to put citizens initiatives onto the ballot and passed with 60%. Like you said, it does cost a lot of money. So people should be applauding, those in the industry that want to come in and they want to, make that investment. Obviously, it helps the business and everything, but like they should be applauding that and saying like, look, we're expanding and pushing the football forward. And like that's how politics works. When I say like, people need to understand the politics, like it is a game of football and you don't necessarily throw a touchdown 80 yards down the field every single time. You move it forward inch by inch. Medical program was a 10-yard gain, right? Like this amendment would be another 20-yard gain. Then you go for homegrown. Then you're going to get into, I don't know if we're going to get into it today, but people want to see like expunging of records for, people who've been arrested for it in the past, right? Like, and so that's the touchdown eventually, but it takes 10-yard increments to get there. And so that's what I try to explain to people is that you have to understand the process. And this amendment is the clearest way to get a first down and go 20 yards down the field on something that everybody seems to be in agreement with what they're trying to do as far as like your audience goes, right? Everyone wants kind of the same thing, but we need to figure out how we can get there and score this touchdown together.
I like your football analogy. That's a pretty good
Yeah.
analogy. I think the only flaw to the analogy is it's a constitutional amendment. So it's permanent. So, and when I say there's no homegrown in the bill, you're right. It doesn't say you can't grow for personal use, but what it does say is that you have to have a license to grow.
Yeah.
And that makes it permanently part of our Constitution. So there's no room for home grow after that is really the question. And again, just going back to, if they were not going to allow it, if there was no argument that was made over the last 8 years that even sparked the conversation of allowing the potential for home grow for patients that are that have debilitating conditions, it's just not going to happen. I mean, I'm sorry, but like, there's nothing that can convince me that might happen. Because here's the thing: like, if we're talking about really legal, and that's what all the marketing continues to say on Amendment 3 is like, we're legalizing marijuana, great, yay, and everybody's excited. And listen, I get the excitement; it's palatable. I can understand that. The plant should have never been made illegal. Let's just say that right off the bat. But if it's truly going to be legal, it should be treated the same as, why is it beer is legal? I can make beer at my house.
Sure.
Wine is legal. I can make wine at my house.
Sure.
Tomatoes, I can grow a tomato plant in my backyard. But if we're saying we're legalizing cannabis, but I can only get it from a corporation who produces it, grows it, and produces it for me, when I don't even know what else is in it. And I'm someone who's very healthy, I'm very holistic myself, and I know a lot of patients who are. That's problematic. So if it just creates massive problems with the possibility of that.
One thing I want to get into, because I think it's important for people to understand, it's not just about this constitutional amendment, because I hear it from a lot of people. Again, I've been doing this for months now, and so I've gone to the debates, I've gone to the forums, I've talked to people. There's a lot of like almost legalese being done on, hey, this line in the amendment says this, so this can happen or this cannot happen. I'll give two really good examples for your audience to understand and look into. In 2000, we had a constitutional amendment that the people voted in. It was approved, that was supposed to bring a publicly funded train from every single major city in the state of Florida. That was destroyed, by the way. So like when people say it can't go in the Constitution, we don't have a train. We're 24 years later. There's no train that connects all the places. So like it goes to the Constitution and it gets guys up to Tallahassee and they mold it and they mold it and they mold it. I also worked on the Felons Restoration of Voting Rights. This was maybe like 4 or 6 years ago. And there was a huge argument after the fact, right? Because this was a constitutional amendment. And then the legislature went up there and they had to argue actually over what the definition of the end of a sentence was, right? Because in the amendment, it says like when somebody has completed their sentence, they can vote again, right? In the state of Florida. And they had to legally define what the end of a sentence was. And so the big argument was between whether it was when they got out of jail or prison, or was it when they paid all their fines and fees. Eventually, I think they came to the right decision, and they did it over the fines and fees thing. But it was a whole big controversy that took place over a couple months period, and it's messy. And this is how politics works all over the country, but also in the state of Florida. Like it's a messy process. And so kind of what you're talking about here with constitutional amendments, so people say like this can't be done, or this should be done, or shouldn't be done, or it can't be because this legally says this. It's going to go to Tallahassee, and you put all of the pressure on the lawmakers to do the things that you want them to do, because I can promise you, like, it will get fought over. Like the lines will get fought over. People's different interests, they will fight over it. It will go to court and everything like that. I'm not even going to touch Amendment 4 but I can tell you if it passes, it's going to be in court for a very long time. Like it's like there's so much there that like when the political will by the party in power wants one thing and there's other interests that want other things, like there's a fight, and it's politics and it's messy.
Yeah, no, and I think what makes it less messy though is an informed public. And at the end of the
Yeah.
day, when people really truly understand that, Homegrown has never been a part of the medical program, this amendment is still a part of the medical program. It just added. It's not going to change after. Like I just don't. I just cannot see that actually ever happening. But again, I think that's the conundrum of it. So kind of moving on to the next one. So there's been a lot of marketing going out, right, saying that the new tax revenue from the new amendment is going to be used for educational purposes, healthcare, and these other vital programs. What assurances does Amendment 3 give to Floridians that the state's going to use this tax revenue in this manner?
Again, the constitutional amendment isn't going to doesn't define exactly where it's going to go. It's not in the language of where it needs to go. And so again, the reality is when it goes to Tallahassee and they start having this giant bag of unmarked cash, basically, they're going to decide where it goes. And I've heard people lobbying already for it, right? Like I've heard, people who are city councilmen, they're like, give it to the cities, and the county commissioners are like, give it to the counties, and firefighters are like, give it to the firefighters, and let's get mental health, and then police. And so there is no assurance to where it is going to go. The only assurance is that people who are clogged up in the legal system, because people still get ticketed all the time for this. Maybe they're not sent to prison, but it is something that they are still ticketed, and they go through the process, and they're this. So it will save us money for police. It will save us money in that type of the law enforcement world. But as far as like where the sales tax revenue is going to go, that's a Tallahassee question that's going to be determined next session if this passes.
There's a lot of uncertainties. Yeah, there's kind of the theme here with this, and I think that's kind of my point. That's my point, though. That's my point of concern. Because again, remember, I'm coming from a space that I'm really looking out for our patients, right? Because I cannot tell you how powerful that this plant can be for thousands and thousands of people, and when I can't look them in the face and say yes, this is a good thing when there's all these maybes. Maybe you'll be able to get Homegrown.
That's kind of how the medical marijuana amendment was too. There was a lot of people who fought against the medical marijuana amendment, and they said, well, what about this? What about this? What about this? And exactly what happened with the medical program was you get it passed as a constitutional amendment, and then it goes in and it turns into, the framework that it has today. And is it perfect? I'd argue it's not. But like it's again, I won't go back to do the whole football analogy again, but it's progress down the field. And this is how you get progress.
No, I appreciate that. And I guess the just to give an alternative analogy for folks to think about it, when your foundation is not built properly, which I would say that the elements of the amendment, the foundation is not built properly, what's going to happen is you're going to stack things on top of it, and it's all going to fall apart. That would be my analogy for that. But just kind of moving on to this. So, and then the same thing, for where this tax revenue is going to go. A lot of promises. We have no assurances where it's going to go, and it's just very misleading when I see all this marketing coming to my house saying it's going to go here, it's going to go there. There's no assurances of that. And people continue to compare this amendment to Colorado's amendment. It's called Amendment 64, right? Theirs is different. Ours is nothing like that. So they don't have vertical integration. So that was different. Smaller cultivators were able to enter the market. But the other part, though, is they actually have it mandated as to where those funds are supposed to go, and it still doesn't go there. By the way, and they still don't get there. Exactly.
Yeah.
But that's probably the leadership over on that side of the.
Yeah, I won't go into the whole Colorado issue, but it is an important one, and I think that that's part of the why you don't make promises when you don't have the ability to control the purse strings ultimately in Tallahassee. Like there's a lot of things that happen in Tallahassee where like the funds are supposed to go to a certain place, and then same thing the federal government. Look, things are earmarked to go somewhere, and then politicians go up there and then they move it somewhere else. It's like Social Security, right? Social Security is supposed to be used on Social Security, but they borrow from it all the time and they spend it on war, right? So like this is the unfortunate political reality for how this type of stuff works.
And this is why I would just say that's what it needs to be outlined in the amendment. It has to be. So kind of moving on, like you mentioned it earlier, decriminalization. That's been a big talking point about this amendment for supporters. How does Amendment 3 address past criminal convictions for possession or usage?
Yeah, I mean, I think I answered this already, but I can go back over it again.
Yeah.
So it doesn't, obviously. This is solely about selling it. But a lot of people are very concerned about what happens for past convictions, and you've got two different elements here to deal with. One, some of these are federal charges, so it's going to be very difficult to try and address federal charges versus state charges and everything like that. It becomes very, very technical. But that is step 5 or 10 of the process of it. Again, I think that's ultimately a lot of people's goal, is to get people's records expunged, and to if they are still facing ticket, like we give out, I think we gave out like 16,000 tickets or something like that in even in Tampa, like in the last so many years, like over marijuana charges, because they don't put them in jail for it, but they still ticket you and they still put you in the process. You still have like a record to deal with, and that can affect employment, all that kind of stuff. So does this amendment address it? No, it does not address it, because it's step 5, 7, 8, 9, 10 down the line for getting there. And once this does pass, again, this is step 1 for passing. If you do not pass this, you are never going to get to the criminal conviction side of it, because you got to get here. You have to start here, and then you eventually get there. And then the activist groups like Last Prisoner Project and some of these very, very good groups will come in and they'll start saying, look, we got to do this first. Now it's legal. Now let's start, trying to get to the point where we actually are, expunging records and things like that many years down the line. It's not
So
going to happen right away.
yeah. So, and I think that's kind of the misleading part of a lot of the stuff that's going out. We talk about decriminalizing. Well, people are expecting to get their records expunged and people get out of jail, but what it does, Amendment 3 does not. There's no provisions for that, and it doesn't change the current laws. And here's the thing: if your product was not purchased from a dispensary at a certain amount, right? It's still a first degree. If it's 20 grams or less, it's a first degree misdemeanor. It's punishable by a year in jail or 12 months of probation, $1,000 fine. That doesn't change if your product was not found in the dispensary packaging, right? Which again locks it down to the corporate entities. And people are not getting out of jail from this. There's a lot of people that are expecting, oh, cool. So, I'll so-and-so be able to get out of jail. That's not going to happen. And in fact, this doesn't change anything. If it's a federal charge, Amendment 3 doesn't address any of that anyway, because you only can possess what Amendment 3 tells you can.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I try to explain to people, maybe hopefully this is another one of the questions down the road that I'm forgetting about, but like the federal portion of this, and I don't want to talk too much about it. Like I can tell you of generally what's going to happen in Florida, right? It's a simple process. They go into session. These things happen. The federal process is a black box. I say that's where like things go to die. Dreams go to die up in Washington, D.C. So like, you have all these ideas of legislation and things that should be done up there, but it takes decades and decades to get like anything done. So, whatever the state does here, if there's anything that involves the federal process, like look, both candidates have said they want to do something about it federally, but again, Washington is a black box.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I would apply that to almost all government
It's all
entities,
things. It's all things, yeah.
Yeah, because I can tell you, I mean, just to kind of go back, I hate to harp on it, but patients have been wanting, been screaming at deaf ears for 8 years now, to get Homegrown, and that's not even a thing. So, yeah, I just, and the other thing too, you're talking about federal, like, something as simple as a vape cartridge. If that was not purchased at a dispensary or it's not found in that packaging, if you are pulled over, that's a felony. A lot of people don't realize that vape cartridges, that's a felony, guys. So, anybody out there who thinks that that's safe, or, you can have it and get away. No, like this amendment doesn't even change that. So that'll be a problem. Now I wanted to kind of move on. I just wanted to have a touch on some of the potential federal risks here, because with federal legalization potentially on the higher horizon. No, I know I don't want to get too into it, but I just want to get your idea or your thoughts. With that on the horizon, and the state's vertical integration model being under federal. Do you think that's going to hold up under federal law, the vertical integration model, based on what you know?
Well, I mean, look at the other 24 states, and that's where you take your examples from. I mean, like, look, there's been this weird, hands-off type of policy that the federal government has taken with the states. Obviously, you still have all the issues with banking that they have, that still exist, and hopefully that's addressed. Everybody says we're going to address it soon. I don't know if we're going to actually solve the problem. Again, I really truly believe that like Washington is like where things go to die. Like it's just like people's souls, like ideas, good legislation, and because there's so many crazy hands that get into the pot up there in Washington D.C. But How does it affect the states? Like, I think that they're going to take a hands-off approach, kind of the same way they have with everybody else. Like, look, it's still like everything technically federally everything is still illegal, the entire country, right? So but you still have 24 states and Washington DC itself, um, all have legalized it at a state level. So like there's obviously some sort of like, it's like a wink and a nod type of um, agreement that they have. Like, look, despite you doing something that's federally illegal, your state legalized it, we're not going to have a war over it. So like they're letting it go. And so like how that plays out in between the Washington DC, I make no predictions about what happens in DC. I especially depends on what happens in this election on November 5th too. I mean, you're going to have two,
Yeah.
you've got two candidates who are saying they want to do something about it, but both historically, their attorney generals, other people in the party and everything have obviously blocked federal descheduling and things like that for a long time.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's something, and I asked this question only because we've been following very closely with the potential federal legalization of medical marijuana, and it is quickly approaching. In fact, they're going to resume public hearings on December the 2nd. It's already been in public hearings.
Yeah.
So it's very possible that that's going to pass from a medical standpoint on a federal level,
Mhm.
which would still make it recreationally illegal on a federal level.
Yeah.
But, something that is concerning, and it should be concerning for legislators in the state of Florida, is the case that's going on right now, Horn v. Medical Marijuana Inc. It's creating a debate whether RICO applies to that or not. And that could create significant lawsuits across all cannabis businesses. And that's why it's so important to separate the medical from the recreational. I think that could really be a huge win for the state of Florida if we did that. And the DEA is literally pushing for rescheduling marijuana from Schedule 1, which is the most severe, it's up there with
Yeah.
heroin and, all the worst drugs, and then down to Schedule 3, which would be similar to benzodiazepine or,
Yeah, it's
in that
it's
family.
supposed to happen. It's supposed to happen. Everybody's anticipating it happening. I just don't hold my breath with anything that goes on up in Washington D.C. I really don't.
But if it does, it puts Florida at a really big risk if Amendment 3 passes and we're combining recreational and medical. So that's my concern. Just for the state of Florida, really. I got another question here. So, given that Amendment 3 will be part of Florida's Constitution, what are the risks if it becomes problematic? And I know we kind of touched on some of these. I just want to be able to give an opportunity to dive in there.
Problematic how, I guess, would be my question.
If people that voted yes are not happy with some of the outcomes after the fact.
Well, again, constitutional amendments, I would tell people to go back to where we were talking about this, like maybe 10 or 15 minutes ago, where I don't want to break it down again about how constitutional amendments work and how the legislature up in Tallahassee will mold this as they see fit. And so constitutional amendments are one thing, but I can assure you that they have been dealt with depending on the political will of what goes on up there. And so again, I'd refer people back to like 15 minutes ago and go back and listen to what I was talking about that.
Yeah. Yeah. I just, just going into, how it's nearly impossible to unwind one of these, and the amount of the sheer volume of money spent on this amendment. I don't see a citizen initiative to be able to put this back on the amendment. Cause here's the thing, like as a company, it doesn't benefit them at all to have Homegrown or some of these other provisions in the bill. It just really doesn't benefit them. So why, and then on top of that, that could hurt their business, right? So if citizens did get organized and raised 110 plus million dollars or so to even get this back on the table, well, they're going to be fighting against a mega corporation or several mega corporations that are making tons of money on this,
That's
which
not, yeah,
will help prevent that.
and to your point, that's not going to happen because that's not how constitutional amendments are. Let me say it this way: this thing, if it is put into a constitutional amendment, which I expected again to pass, it's not going to be unwound by like a citizen led constitutional amendment or something like that. Like the legislature has the power to implement a framework. They're going to implement a framework. And if they wanted to go back to the Constitution for some reason and change something, like they actually have something called a legislative constitutional amendment. So like they can do that. Every 10 years, we have a constitutional committee that comes on and puts constitutional amendments there. They're usually very controversial. They're not something that people do petitions for. They're not there's a small committee of people who come and they do this constitutional committee where they put constitutional amendments on the ballot just as like a group of like 10 people or whatever it is. So like No, you're right. It would not be a citizen led, like you come back and you adjust the Constitution thing. Like again, the legislature, the governor, everybody up there in Tallahassee, and we have a Republican supermajority. And I want people to understand that. And again, as people don't know me that well, but like I'm the head of our Tampa Bay Young Republicans here. I'm our executive director. I'm with the Florida Young Republicans. I work with the international Young Republicans at GOP. Everything. I'm full on usually with the GOP, 90% of the time. This is not one of the 10, this is one of the 10% of the time. But we have a Republican supermajority up there. They are not going to just come if this fails, you will not see a homegrown bill. You will not see a constitutional amendment that they advocate for to expand recreational. They're going to take this and they're going to say, we won, we did it. And if anything, they're going to put more regulations on you, and they're going to come after a lot of the hemp business like they did last time, last year in the last session to try to regulate that business. So what you're going to see is a more aggressive Tallahassee, enabled Tallahassee of Republicans and conservatives that are going to come out, and they're going to put more regulation on you if this does not pass. If this passes, forces them to the desk, and then and this has been something that I've been advocating for decades. I've always been a libertarian Republican.
No, I appreciate that. Well, it's funny because, you talk about the CBD bill, right? DeSantis vetoed that bill. So, I think he's got a sound mind when it comes to it. And he's definitely
go back to it next year and redo a few things, and we'll do it again. So
yeah, and he's definitely not for recreational. So I just can't see him or any of the legislators in the state of Florida, especially being predominantly Republican and who are typically not for recreational. They're just not going to be for this. I mean, there's a lot of people that just don't even believe this is really helping people, which I could.
Yeah, there's a lot of
data about that.
Yeah, I agree with you. There's a lot of lawmakers that don't see the value in that.
And in the hemp regulation stuff, who backed that? That came to like it wasn't legislators that backed it. Who actually backed the hemp regulations that came to DeSantis' desk?
Well, you're going to start seeing what you see in California and stuff like that, where you have like there's just kind of this rampant abuse basically in that industry, which is what Gavin Newsome just had to come down and crack down on it. They're doing what their constituents ask for when it comes to that kind of thing. Where like, look, I've had this argument with people at the county level here too, where they come in, they want to regulate the smoke shops for not being too close to like schools or colleges or whatever it is like that. They're listening to constituents and saying, parents come in and they start complaining about like, oh, we went to this store and my kids bought this thing. Then they want to do something. Everyone wants to feel like they want to do something. I was really against, there was a vaping bill too. I was like so against the vaping bill last year. I made a whole video about it. If people went on my Instagram and go look at it, it's still up. But they wanted to try to regulate the vaping industry here because of all of the different varieties of vapes and everything. And so like, they want to feel like they're doing something for their constituents. And again, you have to like put yourself in the mind of a politician that doesn't have a lot of creative ideas or anything like that. And then they come in, they get complaints about something, and then they want to go back to their district and win an election like they're trying to do right now and say, well, I went and I protected kids and I saved this school and I saved this and I did that. And like, that's where all of that comes from. That a lot of politicians are only motivated by pressure. And this is one of the biggest pressure campaigns to actually do something about the recreational marijuana industry that I've seen in a long time. And if there's not pressure on politicians, they're going to continue to act in their own self-interest.
That is true. And just kind of going back to my question though, who pushed the CBD bill that was trying to take control of CBD? And it was actually SB 1698. It was actually 3 dispensaries came together and put together. So it wasn't legislators that put that on.
Legislators voted. Yeah. I mean, it was passed as a full majority. It was a unanimous vote in the Senate and the House.
But they didn't bring it though. Who brought it to legislators?
They voted for it.
3 of the big dispensaries brought it to legislators, and they were trying, and essentially, and it makes sense. I mean, from a business standpoint, they were trying to control CBD. So everything hemp or cannabis related had to go through them. I get it. But again, it just kind of illustrates the spirit of this amendment, and the spirit of this amendment is not for the people. It's really for these mega corporations that are going to control cannabis for the duration.
I think everybody in this industry is fighting for their own self-preservation, right? I mean, like, look, you see people who have companies, no offense, but like, if you're, the doctors have an angle on this, the dispensaries have an angle on this. If you're in a competing industry, you have an angle on this. If you're the tobacco industry or the alcohol industry, you've got an angle on this. Like, I mean, it's become such big business that people are, concerned for their business. They're concerned for their interest in this and everything. And then you do have people who are just like, I just want to grow it at my house and everything like that. But again, this we talked about it already. Like, it doesn't actually address that in the constitutional amendment, and it can be something that can be addressed. But almost everybody involved in this has some sort of interest in it.
Well, I got to tell you, I don't even like referring to what I do as an industry. I find it kind of a dirty word. Here's the way I look at what we do. There's always going to be people suffering from conditions, right? People are going to always get sick forever. And this significantly helps thousands and thousands of people. And when you have something that's this effective, people are just going to continue coming back. So that fuels our business. And I don't want sick people. In fact, if I would be happy to move on to another business if everyone was cured. That's just not the reality we live in. So
Sure.
I'm invested in positive outcomes for patients. And what hinders positive outcomes is access to quality products. That's what this amendment threatens, because if this passes and it's the dispensaries that can dispense and produce products are limited to a handful of bigger dispensaries, then the quality is not going to be there. It just isn't. Diversity is what drives great quality, and this amendment limits the diversity that's possible, and that's
The
the problem.
amendment doesn't limit diversity. The amendment doesn't limit diversity. The legislature limits diversity. The legislature controls licenses. They could walk out. Governor DeSantis can walk out tomorrow and say, "I have 1,000. I want to give out 1,000 licenses, and we're gonna totally alter everything that you're complaining about here." I don't mean to say complaining in a mean way. Like, I mean, like
No, I get
all the gripes that people in the industry have that want to see a bigger free market and everything. The governor can go do that. The legislature can go do that. The constitutional amendment has no say over how many licenses are given, how it's given, like what the definition of all of these things are. Like, this is something that's totally controlled by Tallahassee. So one of the frustrations I have with campaigning for the amendment is that I'm like, the amendment doesn't change the process for everything like that. They have full control up there. They have full control up there to do all of the things that they want to do, whether it's good or bad. And again, I don't want to give them all the credit in the world, but like, because they mess things up a lot on implementation, but like, it is entirely up to them.
Well, you're absolutely right, and they do have full control. And the only thing, so something I just want to kind of pause on is, we learn a lot from history, right? Looking back definitely helps us pave a better way forward. And when we do look back, especially in the 8 years the medical programs have been around, new licenses haven't been released. Homegrown hasn't been put on, and that's for patients that are suffering. There is nothing. So looking at history, right? Same legislators going forward, there is no way that they're going to now magically say, you know what? Let's do homegrown. Let's remove vertical integration so smaller cultivators can get in, because that's reality. Vertical integration, there is not a single small cultivator that has $50 million to get into the game. It just doesn't happen. And you say it's in full control of the legislator, but it's not. The Constitution says that.
If this constitutional amendment does not pass, I promise you will see zero movement on all the things you're talking about for the next decade, because no one else is going to come in and try to fund a constitutional amendment again if this fails. It's not happening again. So if this fails this time, you're not going to see movement until, like, for all the reasons you just said, there's no political motivation by the conservatives that own the supermajority up there. And by the way, we're going to be a Republican supermajority for the next decade. I promise you, until they redistrict, you have another decade of Republican super control up there. So like, this is how the political reality is on the ground. If this does not pass, you will see no movement on anything else regarding homegrown, regarding recreational, anything like that. Cause it's been tried and denied.
You got to forgive my skepticism. I've heard a lot of promises, but what's in black and white doesn't point to going that way. Unfortunately,
that's just not a promise. It's just that's just an extrapolation on what the last few decades have looked like under the rule we have in Tallahassee. Like, they're not for homegrown and they're not for recreational marijuana. They've denied bill after bill after bill after bill, and that's why this is constitutional amendment. If it were done the way that everybody's talking about, take it to Tallahassee, do it right, all that stuff, it could have been done at any point, at any legislative session. Why is it not happening? Because they don't actually want that.
Well, they don't want it, so it's not going to happen in the future either. And that's kind of the point. I guess we're kind of have two different takes on the same thing.
This amendment forces it to happen.
it doesn't force them to put any of that on the table. It doesn't force them to
It does.
release
It
licenses.
gives them, it's actually in the amendment. You have a 6-month time frame to implement a framework. 6 months,
Right.
so it has to be done next session.
But in that framework, that framework does not, and there's nothing in the amendment that forces them to open more licenses to increase
No, it
the
doesn't.
potential for
No, it
supply
doesn't.
chain. So that's a potential problem. And again, and when I say promises, these are things that could happen, but as of right this second, they're not. And
Yeah.
as of the last 8 years, they haven't been. So it doesn't make sense to me. None of this stuff. It just, if it can't be done under medical with suffering people, I don't see anything happening with recreational or further. It just doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
Mm.
But again, I want to move. We got some questions kind of coming in here, and I wanted to just at
Sure.
least address a couple of questions from our audience here, and then I'm being and then we got to wrap up here soon. But so just kind of go into one of my questions here. Let me get in here real quick. Okay. All right. So one of them says, would I be able to grow for my sixth son? I'm just trying to read through some of them. So would I be able to grow a plant for my sixth son under Amendment 3? And I mean, I think we kind of answered that.
I
Sorry, you
think
might have
I
joined a
think
little
we
late.
covered that.
We covered that
Right.
late. Yeah, that is a different no. You would not be able to do that. Um, all right. Just going to the top here. All right. So, so our elected officials don't want. Some people are just saying that they're asking if our elected officials do or do not want cannabis to be a part of the Florida Constitution.
Well, I think that look, I mean, you can listen to what they're saying during this campaign. If you've had an outspoken politician in your area, whether it's sheriff, state house, senate, anybody like that, they're saying very different things in the last 4 months trying to fight this amendment that they've been saying the last probably decade of their career. So I couldn't speak for in any individual on what they think. I've been very consistent on my position on this. Like I've wanted to see legalized marijuana my entire life. Even voting, registering Republican at 18 years old, I've always wanted to see legalized marijuana. During the medical process, I went up there and I said the same thing, some of the same things that you're saying now about opening licenses, some of the problems that they had created during the medical process. I had, and now I'm saying we need to continue moving the football with legalization through Amendment 3. I think we're doing it the right way. So, but what is your politician saying? What do they actually believe? I don't know. It's an individual basis.
Yeah. I just tell you from my standpoint, just being on this end of this space, they've just not been very friendly or open to it at all,
Mm.
unfortunately.
I
I got to
agree.
look. What about the counties that only approved medical dispensaries in their area? Don't the property owners have any say in having a recreational dispensary in their community?
I can you repeat that question? I'm a little
Yeah,
confused.
yeah. So they're talking about communities that only approve medical dispensaries in their area. So those medical, if it's only approved, what I'm gathering here is if it's only approved under medical in their area. What about the property taxes that owners are having to pay in recreational dispensaries in their community? Does that create a discrepancy?
So the state has something called home rule, not to be confused with homegrown. Like home rule, we we often at the state level create laws, and then the city and the counties are kind of subject to the state rules. I don't know if that helps the answer, but the state laws supersede county and city level laws if it's on like the same issues, depending on
So,
what it is.
so if the state law is passed, then you're saying a county would have to have a dispensary there if they're in
It
a part.
totally depends on their framework. It totally depends on how they define it. One of the things we didn't get into it very much, but like I've wanted to see more proactive, you know, work around the city level, the county level about like how are you going to implement a lot of these things that you're saying you want to do or don't want to do. When it comes to like the public smoking ban, like you're going to end up with a public smoking ban, especially if this passes. It's going to be that's unanimous. It's going to happen. But how do you enforce it, right? Like so at the city and county level, they have to create a new municipal code that basically says we're going to fine people this much in these areas and all that kind of stuff. And the county's the same way, right? They're going to have to go in and make local laws and actually enforce it locally. The state starts here, and then there's a local enforcement level to it. So that's the constant give and take and push and pull between like local, state, federal level. Like it all connects a little bit. So it's disjointed at times, it's messy at times, but that's the political process.
Yeah, yeah. I know in it kind of resonates a little bit. I know in our county, our commissioners put a ban. They put an ordinance that banned MMTCs or dispensaries in our county. So I got time for one more, and then we got to cut it. We're running a little longer than I anticipated here, but I got one more here that I'll read here. It says, I've heard that influencers and politicians are getting paid to vote yes. He was asking if we were at all paid to vote yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think you said at the very beginning of this, like I've been very open. I'm our policy director. I was brought onto the campaign to help bring Republican support because I've been a Republican who supported this my entire life, and I've been very outspoken about it historically. So obviously, yes, the campaign is spending money. I mean, it's all public record, and so is the No campaign. I think what might be more questionable is taxpayer money being used to fight against this. Like we've got marijuana PSAs for the first time in decades, that I'm seeing on gas station pumps by the Department of Transportation, and the Department of Health is running ads and stuff like that. So and they're just running anti-marijuana ads. They're not, they don't address the amendment, but they're running anti-marijuana ads and stuff like that. So look, there's a lot of spending on both sides of this. But it's like I said, it's all public disclosure on PACs and stuff like that.
Yeah, good. I'm glad that you're able to address that. And yeah, like I just I really wish that this amendment was a little different. I think it could really it could have been a great step forward, but there's just too many things in it for me to say to vote yes on it. But listen, I just want you to know I really appreciate the conversation today. I know we covered a lot of ground. We answered a lot of questions. I think there were a lot of Floridians' minds. And again, appreciate your time today.
Absolutely. I'm happy to do it anytime. Whether it's this issue or another issue, like I'm very outspoken on pretty much everything. So, when someone calls for an interview, I'll do the interview.
No, I appreciate it. And I hope you thought it was a civil discourse here. I thought we had a pretty good, healthy conversation here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Well, Jake, again, man, appreciate your time.
I've seen some devolve. I've seen some pretty radical people who don't understand how to be civil during discourse, that have gotten thrown out of meetings and stuff like that. Those people, you probably shouldn't listen to them. But when you can have a civil discourse like this, then you should probably take a listen.
I think that's the key of everything. I think that's the key to helping this country get back on track to where it needs to be. But again, thank you again for your time. Thanks everybody for tuning in and watching. And until next time, everybody.